Linda Blade has a PhD in kinesiology, and she's a former Canadian champion in track and field and a long-time sport performance coach who has trained hundreds of athletes in 7 countries from 5 to 70 years of age. And as a president of Athletics Alberta from 2014 to 2023, she established sex-based eligibility guidelines. And she collaborated with the journalist Barbara Kay in 2021 in order to write the book Unsporting: How Trans Activism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sports. She also contributed a chapter on sports to the 2023 WDI book Women's Rights and Gender Wrongs. She's also a founding member of the International Consortium of Female Sports, launched in January 2023, and she is very committed, as you can see, to ongoing advocacy that focuses on safety and fairness for female athletes across the globe. So delighted to have you here with us today. Linda, over to you.
So I wanted to kind of review where we've been and then where we're going. So as many of you recall, in 2024, IOC President Thomas Bach made this comment, which was unbelievable in light of the 2 men who were in the women's boxing, and each won gold medals in their respective events. Thomas Bach, in a press conference, literally said, "How can somebody be born, raised, competed, and having a passport as a woman cannot be considered a woman?" In other words, if somebody has a passport that says they're a female, they must be female. And this is just so ridiculous because many of us know the truth that there are various ways to have identity papers listing that gender or sex that you aren't. But let's look at what's been happening with the DSD athletes in particular. If you look at the regions of the world where they have birth certificates. So if you have a registered at birth as a proxy for medical screening. So if you're born in a hospital and you get your birth certificate, normally that would imply that the doctors have done some sort of screening or checkup on the baby. And as you can see in European region, region of the Americas, Western Pacific, all above 90% of babies born have been given a birth certificate, which most people would suspect they were checked for genetic abnormalities. But then you start going into Southeast Asia, Eastern Mediterranean region surprised me a little bit, and Africa. If you look at the African region, only 44% of babies actually have birth certificates, which suggests that a lot of babies are born in villages and they aren't screened properly. So it's no surprise that in the history of sport, many athletes that have ambiguous gender or sex, let's say, because we want to stick to that language, ambiguous sex based on the genitals, they are really truly just assumed to be one sex or the other. And most of the time, if it's ambiguous, they're just called female. And then later, when they become an athlete, they have female on their passport. So that's one way where, there's one region of the world where there's a lot of people falling through the cracks in the sense that they aren't properly screened as babies. And they discover later in life, after they go through puberty, that they're actually male. And then here's just a map of the world, some of the areas in the world where it's you can change your gender marker, your sex, on a legal document. In many of the Americas, you can, with no restrictions, change that. If you're male, you can say you're female. It was interesting to note that in Taiwan, it's completely okay to change your sex if somebody made a mistake, let's say at birth. But in Algeria, if you notice in Algeria, once they said Khalef was female, maybe it's not so easy to change the legal document back. But anyway, the very fact that there's a lot of places where athletes can come from where a passport can be designated female, even if a person is male, makes it just means that the door is wide open and there has to be some sort of gatekeeping. The key point here is that any sport policy that stipulates that women or girl as that they are either sex assigned at birth or gender as given on a government document will fail to protect female category. And this has been a big problem in sports. So that was what that comment by President Bach of the Olympic Committee was in 2024. But now, 1 year later, the tune has changed dramatically. Suddenly, in 2025, June 26, 2025, the new president, IOC President Kirsty Coventry, says, it was very clear from the members of the Olympic Committee that we must protect the female category first and foremost. We must do that to ensure fairness. Like this came as a big shock because Kirsty Coventry was pretty much Thomas Bach's selected candidate over Seb Coe to be the new president of the Olympic Committee. So that's very promising. The question is, what happened in the intervening period to cause this change in tone and messaging? And I would say that it's a lot has to do with what happened. A couple things that happened on February 5, 2025. There was an executive order by President Trump and the White House, and it is called Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports. Men and boys competing in female sports is demeaning, unfair, and dangerous to women and girls, and denies women and girls the equal opportunity to participate and excel in competitive sports, was one of the comments. And it's a preliminary statement. And then the entire document goes about restoring the meaning of Title IX as a law requiring the equal opportunity of women and girls to participate in sports on the basis of their female sex, not their gender identity. This has implications because, as some of you might not have known, that the next Olympics is in Los Angeles in 2028. So this is going to be in the United States. And one of the things, a couple of the things that are stated in that executive order maybe aren't fully appreciated. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. As part of the executive order, the White House said the president would be in communication with the assistant to the president for domestic policy to communicate with leadership in all major sports at both state and national levels, conveying the intent to have safe and fair sports for female athletes. Well, we know some of the states like California are still not going along, but there's still a big fight about that. And there's a lot of economic pressure now being put upon states that are not complying. But here's the interesting part. The Secretary of State, so there's 3 stipulations and statements in the executive order that involve international things. So the Secretary of State has to interact with UN to express and let them know that there's the expectation to protect a sex-based female sports category in all international sporting exchanges. And the ones that are most important for the international perspective, and this is what I'm speaking to today, I'm looking at the international perspective. The Secretary of State also has to interact with Homeland Security and order and work with Homeland Security to make sure that there is no entry allowed to a man intending to compete as a woman. So if a Caliph wanted to come in, for example, to do some boxing in LA in 2028, he would not be allowed to, which is there's protection at the borders. The Secretary of State also has to interact with the IOC, which is the key point here, to ensure that the eligibility for participation in women's sporting events is determined according to sex and not gender identity or testosterone reduction. So you can see that Kirsty Covington's comment in June, just this past month, this whole executive order had probably quite a big impact. The other impact was what happened with World Athletics. In March 2025, World Athletics revised the rules on transgender and DSD athletes. The biological sex determination is now going to be undertaken by looking at the SRI gene test that will serve as a highly accurate proxy for biological sex. SRY gene is the gene that codes for the male characteristics on the Y chromosome. And then there's the cheek swab tests that they want to instantiate at the World in September at the World Championships in Tokyo. The World Athletics, it said in that statement back in March, the World Athletics is considering introducing cheek swab tests for all elite athletes wishing to compete in the female category to determine the presence of the SRY gene, a marker of male biological sex. So I think that we're going to see now for the first time in 25 years, a major sporting event where athletes, where the female athletes are going to have to take the cheek swab to verify that they are indeed female, which is like, it's huge. It's what we've been asking for since for a very long time. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how that works. And the IOC is now going to have to pay attention to how that works and maybe go back to doing that themselves, which is huge. So Kirsty Covington, again in June, said now there's going to be a new consultation, a new working group will be formed, composed of experts and representatives from various international federations to create a framework that ensures fairness and inclusion in sport. The primary goal is to develop a policy that protects the female category while considering scientific evidence and medical analysis. So in other words, there were consultations before the year 2000 about getting rid of the cheek swab. There was a consultation between around 2000, and it came out in 2003 that castrated males could compete in women's sports. There was another consultation that led to the 2015 policy that said castration is no longer allowed or no longer required. A man just has to live as a woman for a year, whatever that means, and then reduce his testosterone. And then 2021, when the IOC was embarrassed by Laurel Hubbard in the Tokyo Olympics, then there was the consultation of 2021 in August and September, where athletes like Veronica Ivy and all the trans athletes were invited to the table, and we women explicitly asked whether we could be part of that consultation, and they would not let us be part of, at the table. And that's actually what inspired the launch of the International Consortium on Female Sport, where a bunch of us women, groups of women from 10 different countries now are like, there's an umbrella group, just like WDI is an umbrella group of of organizations from different countries. We are the umbrella group that would like to say that we speak for female athletes in policy development. So we are really hoping we can be part of that. And so here we have the International Consortium on Female Sport. And I would say that the desired approach that we're sort of looking forward to having is that whatever policy is developed, we have to stop calling it the transgender policy. The minute you put the word transgender in a sport policy, the focus goes on to the transgender people or transgender advocates. When you have a policy in sport that says, it's just a transgender alone, like a separate policy, that's like saying, because it's an ideology, that's like saying we need to have a Jewish policy if it's a religion, or we have to have a political policy. Like, we have to stop doing policies for special interest groups and get back to the idea that sex is universal. There has to be a universal policy on athlete eligibility, and we have to just stop calling it the transgender policy completely. And so this time around in 2025, our objective is to draft a policy that we want to see that is the universal policy on athlete eligibility once and for all. And then we should bring that to the table and say, this is the policy we women want, and we want you to see this. We want to see this implemented. So this time we're going to be a little more aggressive in trying to say, not only do we want to see it at the table, but we already have a policy document that we feel that the IOC could simply adopt, and it's sex-based. So we're trying to be a little more assertive this time. And some of the women in our group have a personal connection with Kirsty Coventry because they either swam with her as Olympic athletes, or they're personal friends through the sport. So there is a certain amount of hope that perhaps we've turned the corner where some of us or some groups can be involved, and not just the subgroup of transgender people who show up at these international boardrooms and tell everybody what the policy needs to be for their interests. So I think that's very positive and very hopeful and optimistic. Now, this is pretty much my last slide. I just really want to encourage women, because I know that WDI was very generous in lending their support to our movement as the International Consortium on Female Sport, to say that they are behind us with their big group of people and organizations. And I think the way to help is we have to keep up the pressure, because I think the pressure of everybody speaking out, it's become a landslide, and you can see what's happening in the United States. So many people are talking about it now, and it's fantastic, and everybody's allowed to now. Now we have these platforms like SheWon.org and HeWon.org, and we have all kinds of people now listing situations where men and boys are in women and girls sports. And when that happens, it's so helpful to write letters. If you're part of an organization of radical feminists or whatever, but if you're part of, there, we finally got the solution down there. So we got the right letters directly to the IOC and international federations. So let's say World Boxing just happened in May, when World Boxing was going to come up with a cheek swab like World Athletics. There was an enormous amount of pressure by the Algerian Olympic Committee, by all of these typical UN people, to get World Boxing to reverse its statement on saying they would include cheek swabs. And instantly, because of our new links with all these groups internationally amongst us women, many groups instantly wrote letters and emails to World Boxing, and it had a huge impact, and it helped the leadership of World Boxing to not cave in to the trans activists. And people don't realize that it was very close for World Boxing to have to reverse itself again on the cheek swab and on the gatekeeping for the event that was happening in Holland. And they were able to stand strong because they could show the leadership and all of their members, look how many emails, look how many letters we're getting from these women's organizations. The public is on our side. So it's really important to write letters. The other thing is, because of the executive order and because the next Olympics is in the USA, it is actually going to be very helpful if you hear about any male, like anybody in the world who hears about a man in women's sports, let the State Department, Secretary of State, Homeland Security, write letters to them saying, look, there's a man and he may end up being in the United States for an event. You have to give them the heads up, because as much as they say they're going to help safeguard, they do need our help in knowing who's out there and who's about to enter the country. So I think that's a new sort of arrow in our quiver, like to where we could actually identify people now, because all these websites are coming up where they are identifying. And then I would say that also donate value in kind where possible. So it's not just money, although that could be, WDI needs funding. All these women's groups need funding. There's a lot of legal action happening in the United States now. They all need funding, but it's more than that. It's if there's a letter, like I say, to be written, offer your time to write that letter. Offer your time to call somebody. Offer your body to stand out on the street if there's a protest. There's a lot of ways to also I set up here, retweet. There's so many things you can do just to keep the pressure on the IOC to finish this work and make sure that once and for all, there's a sex-based policy for women's sports in the Olympic Games. And then once that's in there, a lot of other organizations internationally, right to the local level, are going to start changing their policy because the Olympic Committee did it. And as far as this whole idea of an example of value in kind, I wanted to shout out the Women's Rights Network in the UK. It was just really great to see that they were traveling somehow, and they just went right to the IOC headquarters. They walked right in to the IOC headquarter office in Switzerland, and they were just talking to people in the office about what women want. I just thought that was fantastic. That's a really good example of things that you can do, and just we need to be bold. And so I would say that there has been a massive, massive improvement in the situation in sport. There's so much work to be done. We're not there yet, but the tide is definitely turning, and you can see that with all of the things happening in the United States and also across the world, and of course in the UK with the Supreme Court decision, and even with these statements now from some of the major international organizations. I would say if we wanted to have a letter writing campaign, FIFA might be our next target, because FIFA is the one sport that hasn't really listened to us yet. So FIFA would be massive, right? If we could get them to change as well. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who's ever done any work on the sport front, and their advocacy and their pressure, because it actually is really working. And I think I wanted to share that good news and say we're not there yet, but it feels like we're getting there, and we're very close to being able to do it.